My boss told me to lock the door. I already did. But then I lost the key, and everything changed. It was just past 4 in the afternoon, the sunlight slicing across the office in golden beams, painting everything with that almost magical glow that makes even the dullest spreadsheets feel cinematic. I was at my desk, headphones tucked around my neck, finishing up the final touches on a project that had taken longer than expected. The quiet hum of computers and the occasional shuffle of papers made the office feel strangely intimate, as though the space itself were holding its breath. Then she walked in. My boss, Mara. She had this effortless presence that made the air shift when she entered a room. Confident, poised, early 40s, with that graceful way of moving that suggested she owned every space she stepped into without demanding attention. Today, her dark hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands brushing her jawline, catching the light. Her eyes, always sharp and assessing, softened just slightly when they landed on me, and I felt that familiar flutter in my chest, like someone had switched on a small, electric current I hadn't asked for. "Lock the door before you leave," she said, her tone calm but precise, the kind that brooked no argument. I looked up from my screen, tried to maintain my composure, and for a second, the words froze in my throat. "Already did, and lost the key," I replied, trying to sound casual but failing spectacularly. My voice carried that nervous edge I couldn't quite hide. Her eyebrows lifted, a subtle but unmistakable flash of surprise. The corners of her lips curved into something almost mischievous, though she quickly smoothed it into her usual professional expression. There was a pause, a heartbeat stretched long enough that I could feel the tension coil in the small space between us. And then I noticed it, the faint scent of her perfume, a warm, woodsy aroma that seemed to wrap around me. My fingers itched to brush the edge of the desk closer to her, just to be near that presence. "I see," she said softly, tilting her head as she approached my desk. There was no hurry in her steps, just the soft click of her heels against the polished floor, a rhythm that seemed to sync with the quickened beat of my own heart. She leaned slightly, hands resting lightly on the edge of my workspace. Close enough that I could see the subtle curve of her smile, the gentle tension in her jaw, the quiet confidence she carried in every inch of her posture. I cleared my throat, trying to sound unbothered. "Guess we'll have to figure this out together." Her eyes flickered, and I caught that rare glimpse of something softer, vulnerability masked beneath layers of control and poise. It was disarming. For a brief moment, I forgot that she was my boss, the person I was supposed to respect and fear just a little. All I could focus on was the warmth radiating from her, the way her presence seemed to fill the room, and how absurdly aware I was of her just standing there. We both laughed softly, nervous, polite, but with an undertone that hinted at something more electric than either of us would admit. And in that small, sunlit office, the day suddenly felt charged with possibility, a slow hum of tension that neither of us knew how to resolve, yet the office had emptied out long before we realized it. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, throwing stark reflections across polished floors, and the quiet made every little sound, the creak of a chair, the shuffle of papers, echo like it belonged to a theater stage. Mara and I were left alone, searching for the missing key, each drawer and cabinet a small battlefield of tension and curiosity. Her heels clicked softly as she moved, and every step seemed deliberate, calculated yet effortless. I followed her lead, trying not to make it obvious that my heart was doing little somersaults at being this close to her. When she bent to check a lower drawer, our hands brushed, just a flick, almost accidental, but enough to send a jolt through me. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, she paused, lifting her gaze to meet mine. Her eyes were steady, unreadable, but there was a faint curve to her lips, a trace of humor that made me grin nervously. "Careful," she said lightly, her voice a low murmur that seemed to vibrate in the air between us. "We wouldn't want you breaking anything, or losing anything else." I laughed, trying to shake off the sudden awareness of proximity. "I'll try not to," I replied, though the words felt flimsy. My fingers lingered near hers longer than necessary as I handed her a stack of papers. That faint warmth from our brief contact seemed to cling, lingering far longer than it should. As we moved from desk to desk, our paths crossed repeatedly. Each time, our shoulders brushed, our hands accidentally met when pulling open drawers or picking up fallen pens. There was a rhythm to it, a subtle choreography that neither of us acknowledged aloud, but both of us felt. Every touch, however small, seemed amplified in the quiet office, and I caught myself savoring it, despite knowing I shouldn't. At one point, she leaned over the corner of my desk to peer into a drawer, her hair falling forward slightly. I instinctively leaned back, heart hammering, but noticed her hair brushed her cheek in a way that softened her usual sharpness. For a moment, she didn't speak, just exhaled softly, her eyes scanning the space with that same meticulous focus that made her such a capable leader. Yet in that pause, the office felt smaller, more intimate, as though the world had narrowed to the space between us. "Got it?" I asked, my voice quieter than intended, and she looked up, her gaze lingering on me longer than necessary. There was something unspoken in that look, a mix of teasing, curiosity, and perhaps something neither of us had the courage to name yet. Finally, she straightened, brushing her hair back with one hand, and there it was again, that faint scent of her perfume, warm and grounding, that seemed to cling to me even after she moved past. I watched her for a moment, caught between professionalism and the strange pull of something more. We both laughed lightly, nervously, each of us aware of the tension simmering beneath the casual motions. And in the quiet of the empty office, the search for a simple key became a delicate dance of proximity, touch, and awareness, setting the stage for something neither of us could yet define, but both felt growing, quietly, undeniably. By the time we found a corner of the office lounge to sit, the building was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. The moonlight spilled through the wide windows, painting everything in soft silver tones, and for the first time, the office felt less like a workplace and more like a private sanctuary. Mara sank into the couch, her posture relaxed but precise, the lines of her body still radiating effortless grace. I took the seat beside her, careful not to invade her space, though the quiet made every inch of proximity feel magnified. For a while, we said nothing. The search for the lost key had ended, yet neither of us moved to leave. I found myself acutely aware of her, the way her sleeve brushed her wrist, the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders as she exhaled, the gentle weight of her presence pressing against my awareness. It was strange, this pull, the quiet that made even the smallest gestures feel like a secret shared between just the two of us. Our knees were almost touching, and I could feel the warmth radiating from her. It wasn't imposing or forceful, it was calm, steady, and utterly magnetic. Every so often, she shifted slightly, and our thighs brushed. Each accidental contact sent a ripple through me, a mix of surprise and something tender I didn't fully understand. I caught myself wanting to linger there, to let the brush of her hand on the armrest, or the faint pressure of her elbow near mine stretch into something more deliberate, more intimate. The room smelled faintly of leather from the couch, mixed with the lingering traces of her perfume, soft, woody, comforting. I noticed details I wouldn't have otherwise, the way her hair caught the moonlight, strands shimmering like fine silk, the quiet rhythm of her breathing, the small curve of her lips as she glanced toward me without speaking. There was a vulnerability there, subtle and fleeting, that made her seem both commanding and achingly human. I shifted slightly, careful not to crowd her, and she looked at me. That glance lingered longer than normal, and I felt a quiet tension coil in my chest. Neither of us spoke, but the silence was heavy with meaning. It was as if we were both testing boundaries, exploring the strange intimacy that had grown between us in just a few short hours. I wanted to ask her a dozen questions, but the words stuck in my throat, too fragile for the quiet night. At one point, she leaned back, a slight exhale, and for a fleeting instant, her shoulder brushed mine. The warmth spread subtly through me, grounding me and yet igniting something deeper. I wanted to reach out, to close the gap, but the respect I held for her, and the unspoken rules of our relationship, kept me still. Instead, I let myself savor the sensation, the quiet nearness, the almost imperceptible pulse of life in her movements, the way her presence seemed to fill the space with an unspoken connection. Minutes passed like this, measured in soft glances and accidental touches. There was no rush, no dialogue, just an unspoken understanding building between us. And in that still, moonlit lounge, I realized something undeniable. The lost key had brought more than inconvenience. It had opened a door to something much more complex, quiet, and utterly consuming. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting striped patterns across the office floor. The key, the very object that had set all of this into motion, finally emerged from behind a drawer we had both overlooked the previous night. It felt almost anticlimactic, the clinking sound of it being discovered, yet the relief that washed over both of us was tangible. Mara let out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh, and I caught her exhale as if it carried the weight of the night before. We laughed together, the sound light but intimate, the kind of laughter that didn't need to be loud to carry meaning. There was a shared understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that the chaos over a lost key had somehow turned into something unexpectedly personal. I handed it to her, and our fingers brushed over the cold metal. The contact was brief, yet the warmth lingered long after the moment had passed. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice quieter than usual, almost vulnerable. "For being patient, and for not making a bigger deal out of last night." There was a subtle weight behind the words, a hint that she was letting me see a side of her she usually kept hidden from everyone. Her eyes held mine just a beat longer than necessary, and I could feel the pull, the quiet intensity of it settling around us. I hesitated for a moment, then replied, "It wasn't a big deal. I don't mind helping. I mean with you." The words stumbled out, more honest than I had intended, but the warmth in her expression told me she understood the sentiment. For a second, time seemed to slow. The office, normally sterile and businesslike, transformed into a small, private world suspended between the ordinary and something more meaningful. There was a subtle shift in the air. Mara leaned against the desk, her posture relaxed but deliberate. The light caught her hair just so, revealing the soft sheen, and the curve of her neck seemed somehow more delicate than I had noticed before. I felt a quiet awe, part admiration, part something unspoken, a pull I couldn't define fully yet. She wasn't just my boss here, she was a person, complex and warm, someone whose presence stirred something unexpectedly tender within me. We lingered there for a few moments, not out of necessity but because leaving seemed wrong. Each glance carried weight, a flicker of curiosity, a hint of amusement, and an almost imperceptible vulnerability. I realized that in these small, shared silences, we had created a space where age, titles, and professional boundaries faded, leaving only connection. Finally, she smiled, subtle, knowing yet soft, and tucked the key back into her hand. "I appreciate this," she murmured, almost to herself, but loud enough that I heard it. Her eyes met mine again, and there it was, that quiet spark, the recognition of something shifting between us, something neither of us had to name aloud to understand. As she turned back to her work, I sat for a moment, aware of the warmth lingering in my chest. The lost key had been found, but what we had discovered in its wake, the subtle closeness, the quiet confessions, the soft, lingering touches, felt far more significant. And I realized, with a mixture of awe and something like longing, that this was just the beginning. By the time evening settled over the city, the office was long deserted. Mara and I found ourselves on the rooftop, the hum of the city stretching out beneath us like a tapestry of lights and distant murmurs. The sky was painted in shades of deep indigo, punctuated by the soft glimmer of stars and the neon glow of office signs below. For a moment, the world felt suspended, quiet around us despite the distant pulse of life from the streets far below. She leaned casually against the railing, the breeze catching strands of her hair and brushing them against her cheek. I took a step closer, my heart thudding in my chest, and noticed the way the wind made her eyes sparkle, a subtle, almost imperceptible shimmer that seemed to mirror the growing tension between us. She didn't flinch at my presence. Instead, there was a faint smile, soft but knowing, that made my chest tighten. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" she murmured, her voice barely rising above the soft whistle of the wind. I nodded, though words felt inadequate. There was something about being out here with her, away from fluorescent lights and paperwork, that made the distance between us feel both smaller and infinitely more charged. We talked, at first about trivial things, the city lights, the quiet of the rooftop, even the ridiculousness of the key search. But slowly, the conversation deepened, gently peeling back layers we didn't often show at work. She spoke of dreams she had set aside, of small regrets she carried quietly, and I shared thoughts I rarely voiced, fears I'd tucked into corners of my mind. The honesty was intoxicating. Each revelation felt like a step closer, a delicate thread weaving between us. At one point, the wind lifted her hair, and without thinking, I reached out to tuck it behind her ear. My fingers brushed her temple, grazing her skin lightly, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned slightly into the motion, a quiet acknowledgement of the intimacy, small and understated but profoundly electric. The warmth of her skin lingered against my fingertips longer than expected, and my chest tightened at the silent understanding in that simple gesture. We fell into a comfortable silence, standing side by side, shoulders nearly touching. The city stretched endlessly beneath us, but in that moment, all I could focus on was her, the subtle curve of her smile, the quiet confidence she radiated even in stillness, the warmth that seemed to emanate from her in the cool night air. Each breath we shared seemed amplified, each glance carrying meaning neither of us dared speak aloud. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and thoughtful. "I don't usually let myself be this open," she admitted, glancing at me from the corner of her eyes. "But with you, it feels different." I swallowed, my own voice catching slightly. "I feel the same," I whispered. "It's nice being able to just be here." Her gaze softened, and for a heartbeat, I felt the full weight of our connection, attraction, trust, curiosity, and a quiet, unspoken promise of more to come. We didn't touch beyond the fleeting brush earlier, yet the proximity, the shared vulnerability, and the unspoken understanding wrapped around us like a warm, invisible thread. The rooftop became a world unto itself, a space where age, titles, and expectations faded, leaving only the subtle, undeniable closeness that had grown between us. And in that quiet, starlit moment, I realized the connection we shared was no longer just professional. It was something deeper, tentative yet real, fragile yet undeniable. The next morning, the office felt different, lighter somehow, though everything looked the same. The lost key had been found, the tension of the previous night had eased, and yet there was a quiet undercurrent that neither of us could ignore. Mara sat at her desk, focused on her morning emails, the familiar rhythm of typing filling the space between us. I hesitated at the threshold, unsure whether to break the comfortable silence, or simply let the moment linger. She looked up, caught my gaze, and smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips that spoke volumes without words. It was a smile that acknowledged last night, the rooftop conversation, the shared moments of quiet closeness. Her hand brushed the edge of her desk, and I noticed the faint glint of sunlight reflecting off her bracelet. For an instant, my mind froze on the simple elegance of the gesture, the delicate warmth in her movements that had quietly captivated me since the first day I'd noticed her presence. I approached slowly, careful to respect the space between us yet drawn to it, like a moth to light. She didn't move, didn't speak, just regarded me with that steady, composed gaze softened by something intimate, something private. I felt my chest tighten, a familiar flutter settling in my stomach, a mixture of anticipation and contentment. "I got the coffee you like," I said softly, holding out the cup. She accepted it, our fingers brushing once more over the ceramic rim. The contact was fleeting, but the warmth it left seemed to linger, a silent echo of everything that had passed between us. Her eyes softened as she looked at me, and for a heartbeat, the office disappeared. There was nothing but the quiet understanding we now shared, the subtle acknowledgement of feelings neither of us had fully named aloud. We settled into our work, the usual hum of office life resuming around us, but there was a difference now. The playful tension, the silent acknowledgements, the small, meaningful touches, they were all still there, interwoven seamlessly with professionalism. At one point, she glanced at me from across the desk, a faint smile tugging at her lips, and I returned it, feeling that quiet connection bloom between us like a soft, steady light. When the workday drew to a close, we walked toward the elevator together. Our steps matched naturally, side by side, shoulders occasionally brushing. The familiarity of it felt comforting, yet the awareness of her proximity kept my senses alert. At the door, she paused and gave me a small, gentle touch on the arm, a subtle, lingering brush that conveyed far more than words could. "See you tomorrow?" she asked, her voice casual, but with that unmistakable warmth that made it impossible to treat casually. "Absolutely," I replied, smiling, and for a moment we simply stood there, taking in the quiet satisfaction of the day, the shared moments, and the subtle promise of what was to come. As the elevator doors closed, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The lost key had unlocked more than the office door. It had opened a space of connection, trust, and tentative romance. The age gap, the professional boundaries, the uncertainties, they were all still present, yes, but softened by warmth, respect, and mutual understanding. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, it was enough. For the first time, I felt like we were exactly where we were meant to be, together, yet still ourselves, with a future quietly waiting to be discovered.